Okay everybody, shenanigans are finished. We're back from Austin. Time to pull our engine. Hello everybody, welcome back to Make It and Break It. My name's Andrew, and this is, or was, our Project Ute Chrysler 300C. So, last couple episodes we've been struggling with this thing, and it's just been in the way, and we haven't been able to get it street legal. And we've come to a point where we have to kind of choose our projects here. And honestly, this Ute project, as cool as it is going to almost always take the back seat to our Rally RX-8, our Doritos Locos build, my dual sport adventure Yamaha R6 build behind me over here. And I just can't have it blocking up my my driveway anymore, to be honest. So I think we're gonna get rid of the car, but there's some awesome components on here that we wanted to keep. So last episode we went through some of that discussion and designed a engine storage stand that we'll probably go build for ourselves here, and that's because we're gonna actually pull this motor. So this is a 5.7 Hemi Gen 3. It's working in pretty good condition, and we'll probably go open it up and rebuild her anyway, but she's in good condition right now, so might as well save this at least, so we're not completely just wasting an entire car. But the rest of this car we really don't have a whole lot of use for. I think we're going to end up documenting this this engine removal for you guys, and we'll try and do it in as much a DIY fashion as possible, so that if you're trying to go remove this yourself, you can follow along and do all the steps in some order or another. I'm not going to guarantee this is the most optimal order, by the way, but should be able to follow along and pull one of these engines yourself. But first things first, when you're selling a project car, the first thing you do is put it up on Craigslist and see if anyone wants the parts off of it. So let's go do that. So in a previous episode, where we designed our new engine stand and all that sort of stuff, I talked about and was worried about our engine height clearance, or the clearance from our roof of our garage here to get this engine out. I say that because I had some engine clearance issues just getting the engine off of my Mazda RX-8, where I was definitely scraping along the top here. But when you look at that chart that we were using last week for or whenever that video went out for our engine stand design, the actual height of this motor, once you remove the intake, and it's basically just to the valve covers, is not much larger than the rotary on our RX-8, or most other ones actually. They're physically, they take out about the same amount of size. So we actually might have a shot at this, getting this engine up and out and over this this front core support without pulling everything. That saves us a lot of effort, but it also saves us some heartache. So this car, I believe, currently has a charged AC system, and R134A is not as bad as R12. That's the refrigerant for the environment, but it's still considered a hazardous material that is highly fined if you let it out in the environment on your own. And I believe you have to have certifications from the EPA to even work on it. So we don't really want to have to mess with that. If we're going to pull this front core support, we would probably have to pull all of that too, looking at how this thing sets up. Maybe, maybe not. We might be able to snake it through, which, if this doesn't work, we might have to go do anyway. But that's hopefully what we're trying to save. So while this will be like a semi-DIY on how to pull this engine, we're going to do this in a slightly different manner than I would necessarily suggest if you're just pulling it and you know you had the clear space. We're going to pull stuff that we know we have to pull, and in a way that we can check our heights with all of our rigging gear and make sure that we think we're gonna make it before we go end up disconnecting the engine and a bunch of other stuff. And that gives us a shot to maybe put things back together, or at least move it around or solve our problems in one way or another. So that's how we're gonna go about it today. So first things first, when you're doing that, we're gonna go disconnect the battery, because we're gonna be pulling a bunch of electrical connections. No reason to not disconnect the battery and leave a bunch of electrical charge in the system. And then we're gonna end up pulling most of the intake. So we're gonna pull most of this intake track and all of our spark plug wires and everything. We'll set up our cherry picker engine crane over here and in the way we think we're gonna actually go do it, and see if we have clearance. And at that point, we'll give ourselves the go-ahead, or we'll start pulling this whole front core support and see what we have to go do at that point. Hopefully we're good. Okay, so first things first, if you're doing any sort of work on this type of engine, you pretty much have to pull the intake track. So let's get that done. Now you want to pull all the connections for your coil packs and your fuel injectors for both sides. And then go ahead and pull the coil packs. Oh, and before you kill yourself, do remember to pull the hood off. Maybe do it a little bit more carefully than I just did it though. Pay attention when you're pulling these fuel injector plugs. They're a two-stage plug. You have to pull this red part up and then you can pull it out like normal. I found using the hook pick to just get in there, right in here, and this section here, and pulling up was the best way to pull it out. Just an FYI. You're also going to want to clear the harnesses. That's this harness here with your fuel, and this harness right here, which has fuel injectors, coil packs, as well as it runs to your throttle body, coolant temperature sensor, all the way down there on that connection, which is I think either the power, no, that should be the AC compressor down there. So your AC compressor also runs on that same wiring harness. Those of you guys who've been watching this show for a little bit might recognize this. This is your EGR valve. You're gonna wanna pop this out of your intake. There's just a couple O-rings in here. Might have to pull a little bit. Although if you don't want to pull it out here, you can always just disconnect on the other side, which is right down here. And go get your EGR tube out. I did lie, you do have to pull the bolts as well as this O-ring connection. So just FYI. At this point, we're gonna have to start accessing the back of the engine. So we're gonna want to pull this cowl here and this brace. So it's pretty simple. There's bolts on either side, and there's these little fasteners holding the cowl in. You don't necessarily have to pull the cowl all the way off, but you definitely do need to pull this brace off. At this point for us, we're also gonna pull the power control module because we'll want to keep that for now. We're putting the bolts back in from the EGR valve because I don't necessarily want to lose stuff and have to buy random fasteners if I don't have to. but I need much smaller hands. So to give myself a little bit more room when I'm working here, I'm actually going to pull this entire piece off. You don't need to do this, but if you want to give it a little bit of room, do that. But to do that, you're going to have to pull your windshield wiper arms. There's a little cap on the base of the arm here, and then you got to pull them. The service manual says legitimately get like a pulley, like a gear pulley puller, but you can just pry it off with like a pry tool, like this body panel tool. Funny thing, I just pulled this. I had not pulled this cabin air filter, and there's actually none in there. So this car definitely had some interesting past for sure. We've got this whole cover off now. You can kind of see we have much better access to the back of the engine. You can see a couple things we need to remove in order to get this thing. This is our intake off. So back here, I think this is your map sensor, so you want to make sure you disconnect your map sensor. It's a two-stage, just like most of the things here. And then there's a connection for the harness back here you got to remove off the back. And then I think there's one more right here that you'll need to remove and make sure is gone. So make sure everything's off the back of your intake manifold before you go try and disconnect it and pull it up and all that sort of stuff. And while we're back here, don't forget that there's a couple, let's see if we can get this thing in here. Got this thing on a tripod today and it's being a little bit more annoying than normal. Don't forget that these also have ground clamps on this head and on that head. So when you want to clear this, which we're going to do right now just because we're going to have to do that eventually, you do have to pull those ground clamps or the ground connections off the heads. And in fact, those are the connections we're going to try and use to lift this thing once we start rigging this thing out. Finally, when we're doing this, the last thing we're going to do, this is your fuel right here coming in. So here's your fuel connection. You'll want to disconnect that, preferably over at least one or two rags, because there's going to be fuel in here, and there's not much you can do about that. So there's going to be fuel in here, so disconnect it, have some rags in there, and then this is why we discharge all the electrical stuff, so there's not any built-up charge sitting around here in case some of these fumes want to ignite or something for us. So we'll go do that real quick. All right, so at this point, we've got all of our connections, wire and everything else. Oh, no, there's one more vacuum line. Hold on. So there's one extra vacuum line on the back side of your intake here that I have not yet removed. So we're going to take a quick break from trying to remove a vacuum line that we can't really get to right now, and actually just pull our intake off, and we'll just pull the vacuum line off the back end of that. And that's pretty easy. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts on each side. They're 8mm head size, so get yourself an 8mm ratchet or gun and zip them on out, and then lift out your intake manifold. All right, so I had great plans of checking the clearance of this thing before I lifted it up on the lifts and going for it, but that's not actually working out because the shady things continue on this car. And this problem I found might actually explain why we have really weird and intermittent idle problems. So right here on top, and we'll get some B-roll of this, hopefully. So right here on top, you have your water pump and basically the whole front assembly here. And there's a bunch of bolts that put that whole front pump cover, waterway cover, pump cover, whatever it is, on and affix it to the front of the block. The problem here is someone decided that the fastener that was in this, for some reason or another, wasn't quite long enough, and they put a 37-inch fastener in. And so it's actually on the bottom of the intake manifold where it shouldn't. There's no reason for that bolt to be that long. Looks like we have to change our plans a little bit and actually lift this thing up and drain the coolant, and then we'll get back to our regularly scheduled programming. All right, that's gonna take a little bit. I did want to show you guys one trick to get it to drain as fast as possible. So 5.7 Hemis, this is your front water pump cover area, and this is an actual vent port. I'm gonna hide that so I don't get sued by the NFL. This is an actual vent port for when you're filling up your system. You actually vent this and then wait for a little bit of water to come out, and then you close it up, and you know you've got most of the water out of the system. Then you have to, the drain and all that sort of process is much easier if you use that. So when you're draining it, just pull that. I was actually able to pull it all the way out, and that'll give you another air vent on top of opening up your radiator or your reservoir cap. So while that's draining, and that'll take a long time, we're gonna go try and get this bolt out. So we got the intake out. I'll show you the bolt. Actually, let's show you the bolt now. Spin the camera around. Oh, this is where our intake was, right? Zoomed out. So here's your intake plenum areas, right? So this will go into your actual head area, and that'll let the engine breathe and everything. So this is just a pad that takes up the space between the intake and the top of the block there. Not a whole lot in. But you see this thing that's sticking way the heck out here? This is a bolt that's already backed out a good, I don't know, what is that, quarter of an inch? Half an inch? And it still sticks like a good 2.5 inches clear on the back side. So what that did, so this is the bottom side of your intake plenum. You don't really see this side. You see this is all the mating points here where it would go into the engine block. And handy thing, these bolts are captivated bolts, which is really nice. Good job, Dodge and or Mercedes, whoever decided they wanted to do this on this intake plenum. Captivated bolts is really nice on top of your intake. Generally make sure that you don't drop a bolt in your engine. But right here, that's not normal. And if we get up close enough, let's see if it'll, yeah, you see the threading in there? That's where someone just took a gun and just ran that extra long bolt in there, and it punched through, and it also threaded this. And if we shine the light, let's see if I can get this on camera. I could see this. There, you see some of that light down in that hole? That means there's an air, this is an air passage from our intake. So this would be where your throttle body mounts. Air goes in here, and then it's distributed to each one of these individual plenums for your cylinders. That means some air could get in from here, which is on the back side of our throttle body. Essentially functions like a vacuum leak, which is probably why we're getting inconsistent, what's the word I'm looking for? Idle RPMs is because we're getting some air past this, and it'll distribute out through the rest of the engine. So this is someone screwing up, because this bolt is not supposed to be that long. None of the other bolts up there are that long. No sane engineer specs a bolt that's anywhere near impacting a plastic piece like this. So just adding this to the janky stuff that we've found on this engine. This is probably the cause of a lot of our emissions code stuff recently. But in truth, there's still more problems with this engine anyway. And we'll have to deal with those once we have it back out on the stand. Just wanted to show you guys this, because this is what happens when someone who doesn't know what they're doing or doesn't care works on your engine. So I know everyone's worried about it, and it's a common problem. Shady mechanics that don't do good work, but this is what happens, and this is not a normal place where you look for a vacuum leak. So this is pretty much impossible to understand why a vacuum leak would be here, unless you're trying to pull off the intake clamp and realize the whole front wouldn't move because there's a bolt sticking through it. So, yeah, fun times on the 300 still. So we just pulled the upper radiator hose here. We're continuing with our engine peripherals removals, trying to get everything disconnected from the engine so we can pull it out. It's pretty standard stuff. So the upper radiator hose is pretty easy, actually. Let me pick up the tripod here, and sorry about the earthquake, guys. So, stuck. This is your front engine cover, water pump cover area. This is that bleed valve I was talking about earlier. Just runs straight from here, and then right back over here to your upper passenger side part of your radiator. Easy, it's just 2 spring clamps, probably. And if your hose is as old as this one, it'll be a pain to get off the engine side connection, because that connection is flared, and these hoses tend to adhere pretty well to those types of connections. So watch out for that. Get yourself a set of picks or something like that to help you get these out. But pull that out, and then let a little bit more air run through your system. Just getting as many air and vent points as possible while we have our radiator open, so that we can get as much water out as possible, since we're not going to be able to get as much oil out as we'd like. Alright, so we're running close to the end of the night here. I need to throw this away because this is junk. This is just that pad that was in the V of the engine. I'm running close to the end of my night here, unfortunately, so hopefully this video is at least somewhat informative to some of you guys. But good practice is to never leave open intakes. Now this engine is not going to get reinstalled as it is. Based on everything that I've seen about this thing, it's worth tearing it apart and taking a look at it before I go reinstall it in some other project that I care about. But I do want to practice good stuff, because if you don't make it a practice, you will forget it when you want to do it. So good practice is clean up everything around your intake. So I didn't show it because it's super loud, and I also want to listen a little bit of football. I brought in my shop vac and cleaned up all the junk that was around our intake. I probably should have done that before I pulled the intake, but whatever. But all of our intake flange areas, I cleaned all those up, and then I just took a rag and cleaned up all the like standing oil and whatever else was sitting in there, which I'm not a super big fan of seeing oil in my intake manifold areas, but this engine's older anyway. But now what you do, what's the trick? Usually it's blue painter's tape. I don't happen to have any. So this is what is this? Brown Packers tape. Is to take some sort of, my old job we used to call it FME, foreign material exclusion. Some sort of cover, and cover up your intakes, because that's where a lot of the bad stuff can get into your engine, and if you're not going to clean it, like this stuff, these heads are going to go off and get fixed and cleaned, and the engine's going to get pulled apart and all that stuff later. But if I weren't doing that, now we're just going to take it out and put it into the next project, whatever it is. You want to make sure that nothing gets into the intake, because that happens before the explosion, not after the explosion, which means it'll get in amongst your cylinder, and it's really bad. So clean it up, put some tape over it, and it's a lot easier to walk away from something than just leaving an open intake. So a lot of you guys, well, not you, Mom, but most of you guys watching this probably know that sort of work practice, but it never hurts to repeat basic work practices. I know my old job, we did some very cool, unique work, but we would also have to reiterate all the time basic stuff, because when you're doing stuff that you're not used to, it's real easy to get caught up in all the new stuff and forget the basic work practices that keep all of your stuff, your components, and your engine safe. All right, my other battery ran out of camera. My other camera ran out of battery, so we're gonna finish up on this. It's getting late anyway, so I was in the middle of explaining why you use blue painter's tape. It's because it's the residue. This stuff doesn't stick very well to anything that isn't paper, so it's also not going to leave a bunch of residue, but it's also not going to be nearly as secure as blue painter's tape. Anyway, that's pretty much where we're going to stop for now. That's kind of how you remove the intake manifold portion of the engine. So if you ever want to remove your intake manifold, it's pretty much how you do it. I would suggest that you run it out of gas first. I forgot to do that, and there's a definite gas smell in this garage here. Which you do that by turning the engine on and then go pulling the fuel pump relay or the fuel pump fuse. And what that does is it turns off the fuel pump, and then the engine just sucks out the rest of the gas in the fuel rails, and then you'll have much less fuel to deal with. I had to pour a bunch of my fuel out into rags and deal with it that way. But yeah, that's how you remove your intake manifold. And some of the other peripherals that you'll need to remove to get to your engine removal. Next episode, we're going to finish up peripheral removal. That's like accessory belts, a couple pumps and drives in here, and then separate this thing from the transmission and get her on out of here, hopefully. I'm moderately hopeful that we will be able to get this thing out without pulling the front core support. Unfortunately, we didn't get to test fit our lifting setup, but we'll have plenty of time to do that when we drop it back down after draining the rest of our fluids and pulling the rest of our accessories and separating the engine from the transmission. Until then, thanks for watching, everyone. My name's Andrew. This is Make It and Break It. If you like this video, like it, comment down below. If you're a little bit unsure of where I'm pointing at for some things, then definitely hit me up in the comments. If you like what we're doing this channel, we just got back from a Formula 1 trip that we documented for you guys. We do a lot of work on our Chrysler 300C, fixing a bunch of problems before we found out that it was still just too broke and we ran out of time to get it titled. We also have motorcycle and an RX-8 race car build, so if any of that sounds interesting, then definitely subscribe, ding that bell icon, and check us out. So thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll catch you all later.